Darker chocolate is preferable for its antioxidant capabilities over, for example, milk chocolate. So when you buy your chocolate bar, you want to look for the highest amount of cocoa possible because that's where the antioxidants actually reside.
Welcome to the Learn Skin podcast with me, Dr. Raja.
And me, Dr. Hadar, where we discuss all things skin.
Join us as we delve into the art and science of skin health in today's episode.
Hey, Raja, can you say the thing I told you to tell them?
Of course. We are board-certified dermatologists. This podcast is meant for educational and informational purposes only and is not considered medical advice, nor does it serve as a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. All opinions shared do not express the views of Learn Health, Inc. Let's get to the good stuff.
Hey, Raja, how are you today?
Hey, Hadar. It's one of those days where I sit and ponder and I think about all the foods that we eat that we could be using for our skin. What do you think?
Oh my God, one of those days, for me, it's like every minute of the day. I think about food a lot. But I gotta tell you, today I got a sweet tooth. I feel like some cocoa is approaching. I kind of smell that bean really cooking. And I think we have a great program for our listeners today because today we have an original with us. Raja, would you introduce our guest?
Oh my gosh, she is an absolute Renaissance woman within dermatology. She's probably got her hands on so many different ways that we approach research and approach clinical practice. We have Dr. Zoe Draelos. She's been an inspiration for me personally, I have to say, for many years. I actually kind of fashioned how I approach private practice by talking to her a bit and then thinking hey, maybe I can do it. So I just want to say for everybody out there, if you're thinking there's too much of a big leap, just talk to someone that's done it and they'll break it down. It's like she broke it down to just these small little bites that she did. And she's a research, clinical, board-certified dermatologist, fellow of the American Academy. She's got a solo private practice in High Point, North Carolina. She's also a consulting professor at dermatology at Duke University. And then she's founded this Dermatologic Consulting Services research company that has done all kinds of really cool research, covering anything from pharmaceuticals to OTCs to natural ingredients. And I just find her publications inspirational. And then I know that maybe we didn't talk about this too much, but Zoe, welcome to the podcast. And you were also the editor-in-chief for the Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology, correct?
Yes, I did that for 10 years and then handed the baton off to Michael Gold.
Yeah, no, you did such a fantastic job. I think that journal really flourished under your leadership. So we are super thrilled to have you join us. And of course, we're going to be talking about cocoa. I mean, that's pretty cool too, but welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, everybody needs to talk about cocoa because chocolate is near and dear to many people's hearts.
Absolutely. But before we jump into that beautiful flavored discussion, I want to ask you, Zoe, as Raja alluded to, you're really an accomplished dermatologist. And I wanted to ask you specifically how you got interested in ingredients, because that's a lot of what you do. It's not everything that you do, obviously, but I think when dermatologists think about this field, it can be a little challenging trying to put everything into order and how to do research in that space, and because there's so many moving pieces. How did you get interested in this and put your research agenda together?
Well, when I was in residency, my residency director was Peter Lynch, and I had always been interested in over-the-counter products. Part of that's because I started out in beauty school when I was in actually high school. I had finished all the required classes and I decided, I'm just going to do something totally out of the box. And so I did cosmetology school and found it really fascinating. And when I started my dermatology residency, of course, I had all this background experience in hair, nail, and skincare. And Dr. Lynch said to me, you should really develop this area and think about it a little more. My undergraduate degree was in engineering. I'd started out in chemical engineering. And so chemistry was one of my loves as well. And I realized that there is a lot of very serious, very sophisticated chemical reactions that occur in over-the-counter products. For example, cleansing. We wash our hands 5-10 times a day. The interaction between the surfactant, the skin, the water is probably one of the most complex physical chemical interactions anywhere. And that intrigued me. And from that, I got interested in sunscreens. How do they absorb UV radiation? How do they reflect it back? How do inorganic ingredients compared to organic ingredients, and the organic ingredients break down, and what are those byproducts, and how do those byproducts affect the SPF of the product. And I got interested in all of that. And then from there, I got interested in natural topical ingredients. Do they really work? Are they biologically active? Do they have an effect, or are they fluff and stuff? And so this whole area was really flooded by pseudoscience. And it's so inherent to dermatology. It's sort of the basis of skincare. And I thought, we really need to have some science here. We really need to understand this area. It's a billion dollar industry, and dermatologists are kind of at the top of it, trying to understand better how the skin functions, how to make it optimally function, and how to have great looking skin for life. And all of that intrigued me, and I decided, this is an area where I want to put more effort.
Zoe, first of all, let me just say this is very cool, but as you were talking, I started thinking about, in dermatology, I think we have way less than 7 degrees to get Kevin Bacon. It just hit me. First of all, I'm a chemical engineer going through like my undergrad training, so that's pretty cool. But when you say Peter Lynch, was it the father Peter Lynch or the son Peter Lynch, who's also made a huge name for himself over at University of Minnesota and then at UC Davis? Which Peter Lynch was it?
So the father Peter Lynch was the head of dermatology in Minnesota, and the son Peter Lynch was also a dermatologist. And he started his academic career at the University of Arizona and then went to Minnesota and Davis afterwards, following his father's footsteps.
I see. So you were talking to the father, or was it the son
I
originally?
was talking to the son.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy because he was my attending as well at UC Davis. There you
Yes.
go. 1 degree of separation. I love it.
It's one big family. And Zoe, what I find so inspirational in your story is that you took this part of dermatology that most medical dermatologists and even aesthetic dermatologists really kind of shy away from. They don't want to talk about the over-the-counter. That's for the simpletons, right? But you took it from your passion even as a young woman and then really build your chops in this. And I think that's really key for looking forward into developing a career is get a really unique set of knowledge base that can really propel you forward. And I really appreciate you bringing this to the fore because, it's your inspiration from learning that early on, but then building your chops in chemistry and understanding these reactions, as you alluded to, really that helps guide you. And now, obviously, a dermatological training on top. So let's dive into the cocoa world here in this very sharp transition. But tell me, why should dermatologists and anybody who cares about skin and listening to us should really be knowledgeable about this ingredient?
Well, cocoa butter was one of the first natural moisturizing ingredients. Probably the two first moisturizers that were ever invented. One was petroleum jelly, better known as Vaseline, and the other was cocoa butter. And cocoa butter is one of the excipients that comes from cocoa beans. The other is cocoa powder that we think about being put in hot chocolate. And then the nibs that also come from cocoa beans, and those are ground up and put into chocolate. And cocoa really has a rich history. It was originally found in Latin America on cups and plates in Honduras at 2000 BC. So ancient man had already discovered cocoa. And then it was also largely propagated by the Mayans in about 900 AD. And chocolate and cocoa for the purpose of making chocolate was really brought to Europe by the Spanish in 1505. And it was used as a medicament. It was one of the first medicines given to people in the 17th and 18th century. And it was used both topically and orally because remember that cocoa does contain methylxanthine, and the methylxanthine is caffeine, and that is a stimulant. So we're going to set aside kind of the oral uses of cocoa and really focus on the topical aspects of cocoa. Cocoa is a very important anti-inflammatory. It has 2 polyphenols in it. The polyphenols are of the flavonol category, and they are actually the same flavonols that are found in green tea, which is epicatechin and catechin. And so the topical effects of catechin and epicatechin are quite profound. They're very strong antioxidants and very strong anti-inflammatories.
Well, that sounds like a lot of good potential for dermatology, especially anti-inflammatory, but also using it as a moisturizer. Where do you find the sweet spot for this ingredient right now on the market, and maybe products that are existing over the counter or otherwise? Where is the sweet spot for use in dermatology in 2025?
Well, if you look at the cocoa bean, about 54% of it is cocoa butter, which is the fat. And cocoa butter is the basis for a lot of moisturizers like Palmer's cocoa butter that's been on the market for many, many, many years. It's still a family-owned company, and cocoa butter people will use on everything from stretch marks to cracked fingernails to sore feet to diabetic wounds. And of the cocoa bean, about 3% is the polyphenol constituents. And of the polyphenols, about 37% are catechins, about 58% are proanthocyanins, and about 4% are anthocyanins. So it has a very rich mixture of polyphenols, and for that reason, it's being used not only as an occlusive moisturizer, which is really the effect of the cocoa butter, but as an anti-inflammatory, anti-aging ingredient. Because it's such a potent anti-inflammatory, it actually is a natural photoprotective against UV radiation.
Yeah, this is fascinating, Zoe. So I'm curious, where do you see this really being of use in, say, the setting of OTC with the patient? What areas and how do you typically apply this? And is it something that we should also be ingesting? I mean, are there benefits to ingesting it too? I know that's a second question, but maybe you can start with the first one. Like, what are the clinical or cosmetic changes that you might see when you apply this?
Sure. So the cocoflavanols, which are epicatechin and catechin, inhibit NF-kappa beta and also reduce interleukin-2 production. And so as a result of that, cocoflavanols can be used to downregulate inflammatory cytokines. And cocoa can also be applied in a poultice to the skin surface after sunburn or after any type of injury to the skin, such as a burn. So what antioxidants do, which is basically what the cocoa polyphenols are, is they donate an electron. So when a reactive oxygen species is created when a photon of UV energy strikes the skin, the oxygen in the skin basically gets an electron removed by this photon of UV radiation. Removal of that electron from an oxygen species converts it into a reactive oxygen species, sometimes abbreviated ROS. The reactive oxygen species needs to have another electron in order to be quenched. You can kind of think of a reactive oxygen species as a ping pong ball that's bouncing around in the dermis. And every time it impinges on the collagen, it basically breaks the collagen, fragments the collagen, and also has the same effect on elastin. So in order to stop this reactive oxygen species ping pong ball from bouncing around in the dermis, it needs another electron. Once it gets that electron, it's then quenched and no longer causes any damage in the skin. And that electron comes from anti-inflammatory, antioxidant molecules such as cocoa. So the catechin and epicatechin in cocoa can donate that spare electron back to reactive oxygen species, quenching the reactive oxygen species and stopping the damage to the skin. So cocoa, in order to work on the skin, needs to be stable. In other words, it can't be completely oxidized when it's exposed to oxygen, or it wouldn't have any electrons to donate. It has to be present in sufficient amount to donate enough electrons to have an anti-inflammatory effect that's perceivable. Then it actually has to enter the stratum corneum in order to create some type of a depot effect, so the antioxidant longevity lasts beyond just rubbing off the cocoa butter. And then once it gets into the stratum corneum, it needs to remain structurally stable so it's biologically active. So stability and formulation of sufficient amount, the ability to enter the stratum corneum, and the ability to remain biologically stable and active in the stratum corneum is what's necessary for a topical ingredient of natural derivation to function as an antioxidant.
Just to follow up on Raja's question, because we understand from your really, really eloquent description how we could use this topically on various injuries and maybe even inflammatory conditions, I think all our listeners are wondering, what happens if I eat chocolate.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
So for many years, there was this notion that it's not good for your skin. I think acne is the first association that comes to mind.
Well, Hadar, you probably load up a bunch of sugar in there, my friend.
Oh yeah. And so the question, and that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, is there different kinds of chocolate that people eat? And is it really the cocoa bean has now been really modified so much when we eat chocolate that we buy in the store or in the gas station on our way to our trip? Is that the original cocoa ingredients that you are talking about with all these amazing benefits, or has that been changed? And how do we select the right oral chocolate that we'll have?
Well, I think Raja kind of hit the nail on the head. There can't be a lot of sugar. All chocolate is not alike, but now you can buy chocolate bars that specify the percentage of cocoa that's in there. So, for example, dark chocolate, the darker the chocolate, the higher the cocoa level, also the higher the caffeine level as well. But there is excellent evidence that shows that chocolate can function as an internal antioxidant. But if you add a little bit of cocoa, a lot of sugar, and a lot of milk to make milk chocolate, then I think that much of the milk is the issue with acne, and then of course the sugar being a high glycemic food. So darker chocolate is preferable for its antioxidant capabilities over, for example, milk chocolate. So when you buy your chocolate bar, you want to look for the highest amount of cocoa possible because that's where the antioxidants actually reside. And our research looked more at the topical use, and we actually did some really interesting liquid chromatography mass spectrometry work to kind of really take a deep dive into the chemistry of how cocoa interacts with the skin.
So that kind of begs the question. I mean, I have more questions about topicals, but now you're getting molecular with topicals. So what did you find, Zoe?
Well, what we did is we took 5 people, ages 25 to 60 years of age, and we used females because we didn't want to have to deal with hair on the arms. And what we did is we selected sites on the arm and we applied a 6% aqueous solution of cocoa powder. And 6% cocoa is what's typically used in skincare products. And then what we did is we put it on the arm, we covered it on the arm, we had people sit with us and had their arms out on the table so we were sure that the cocoa stayed there, and then we covered the area with a bandage, impermeable area over the cocoa solution, and then over that we put some Coban and some tape to keep it in place. And we had them basically sit there for us. We applied 2 cc's of a water-based cocoa solution. And then what we did is we had them sit there and we sampled the area with D-squames, which are like sticky packing tape pieces, 1 hour and 2 hours after application. And D-squames basically allow you to remove dead skin scale. It's kind of like sticking Scotch tape to your skin. And so what we did in the designated areas 1 hour after application and then a second separate area 2 hours after application is we took the D-squames, pulled them off, put them into a sampling jar, and we pulled them off 15 layers deep. So that got us 15 layers into the stratum corneum. 20 layers of tape stripping with D-squames takes you all the way through the stratum corneum, and you start to get to the very base of the viable epidermis and you start to see some punctate hemorrhages. Once you reach those punctate hemorrhages, your tape strips don't stick anymore, so you have to stop. So we collected 15 of these. They're about 7/8 inch pieces of thick packing tape, and then we put them into sampling vials, and then we stored them at -80 degrees Celsius until we were ready to run them. Then what we did is we took the jars out, we solubilized all the skin scale off the D-squame tape. We then filtered the liquid because we had to also remove all of the glue. And then we took the residual liquid and put that on a high pressure liquid chromatography machine to basically get only the polyphenols, the epicatechin and the catechin, to come off on the column, and then we analyzed the purity and the amount that was contained within our liquid using mass spectrometry. And what we were able to do then was to develop a graph of how much catechin got into the skin at 1 hour and 2 hours, at what depth into the stratum corneum. So we were able to make a graph of penetration into the stratum corneum of catechin and epicatechin over time. And then we pulled the data from the 5 subjects where we obtained 10 samples and then looked to see exactly what happened. And we found that after 2 hours of exposure to 6% cocoa powder, 5 to 37 nanograms of epicatechin was found in the skin all the way to 10 layers deep, which is halfway through the epidermis. And then after 2 hours of skin exposure to 6% cocoa powder, we found there were 4 to 8 nanograms. There was about 3 times as much epicatechin as catechin, and that's exactly what's present in cocoa powder and foodstuffs, because cocoa has been very well characterized by the chocolate industry. So that ratio is exactly what you find in ingested chocolate, and we were able to demonstrate that penetration into the skin. So this LCMS evaluation technique allowed us to validate that indeed catechin and epicatechin do get into the skin. They're there in sufficient amount to make a difference. They get there intact because with the mass spec we were able to look at the purity of the epicatechin and catechin. And then finally you would assume that if you got that antioxidant in there, it was going to be functional. That was the one thing that would be a limitation of our study, is to demonstrate functionality. We basically were demonstrating presence. But indeed, cocoa polyphenols can function and do reach the skin about halfway through the epidermis intact. So I thought that was very interesting because this technique is used a lot of times for topical penetration of corticosteroids, retinoids, other drugs, and we just adapted this technique to look at natural ingredients and their skin benefit.
Wow, that is really interesting. So, basically what you're saying is when you apply this topically, those antioxidants are getting in. They're not just sitting on top of the skin, they're actually getting into the skin. And so, very cool way of characterizing that. I did want to mention something. I totally slipped my mind, but I actually take a spoonful of cocoa powder every single day as part of my supplements. And I love throwing it into a smoothie just because it gives it that chocolate-ish flavor without all the sugar that comes with it. So, Zoe, have you looked at oral ingestion, like looking at supplementation with cocoa or cocoa nibs, which tend to be a little bit less processed, and looking at its effect with internal ingestion? It's kind of a really interesting thought experiment.
Yes, it is. And definitely cocoa nibs are also very rich in cocoa flavonols as well. I haven't done an in-depth dive into oral supplementation like I did into topical application. But if you look at the literature, there are a lot of well worked out studies, especially in the food literature, where the chocolate industry has looked at the antioxidant
I'm sure.
capabilities of various different extracts of chocolate. Because you have your chocolate liqueur, right, that's prepared from the dried and fermented seed of the cocoa bean. Then you have the expeller that kind of removes the cocoa butter from the liqueur. And when you remove the cocoa butter from the chocolate liqueur, that's when you get cocoa powder. And so there are many different, all parts of the fruit and bean of the cocoa plant are used. They come from Africa, Asia, Central and Latin America. They grow in very, very wet environments. But oral consumption, especially of the ground nibs, is becoming very, very popular. And I think a lot of people are adding cocoa to a lot of the powders that you put in water and then swirl around and then drink that to get your antioxidants. So one thing about cocoa is it's very stable. It's a very stable substance. It's not like antioxidants, for example, that you might derive from eating a banana, where it oxidizes sitting on the cabinet after you've sliced it. Cocoa is very, very stable, and its stability lends itself to be used in many vitamin supplements. And if you look at the food industry, cocoa polyphenols are widely used in preparations and various different types of chocolates that are sold.
I mean, these cacao trees are so beautiful too, just to look at. I mean, it's this beautiful red that comes of it, and then I know they'll take it from there. The other part that I think is very interesting, I love that you're pointing out some of this oral ingestion, is also now people are starting to do cacao tree leaf tea. instead of green tea, and they're looking at that as another way to get the cacao goodness. Hadar, you're going to have to put the sugar to the side, my friend. You might have to put it in afterwards, or just imagine the sugar if you want the benefits.
I know. And the reason I was so quiet when you guys were conversing is not because I don't have the chemistry engineering chops to get involved in that, is because I was sipping on my hot cocoa here. And even though it's Florida, I got the AC up just so I can have some hot chocolate. But back to our topic, Zoe, I know you also care for patients. And can you give us an example of where we could really apply all this knowledge, as you described, the anti-inflammatory effect, the ability of it to really penetrate at least to the epidermal level to really make clinical benefit? Is there a prototypical patient that would come to mind?
Well, yes, maybe I can talk a little bit to the oral aspects first and then talk a little bit to the topical aspects. So there are a whole lot of bioactive ingredients in cocoa. So, for example, minerals. We talk a lot about our matrix metalloproteinases in dermatology, and many of those matrix metalloproteases are dependent upon zinc and iron. And cocoa is very rich in magnesium, zinc, and iron. So those are the mineral component. Then oral cocoa and topical cocoa as well are very rich in methylxanthines, xanthine alkaloids, and that includes caffeine. And so cocoa is put in many topical products for the treatment of cellulite because methylxanthines are supposed to promote lipolysis. Cocoa also contains theobromine in addition to caffeine. So you'll find cocoa in many of your cellulite minimizing products. The other thing is you'll find cocoa in products that are designed to be anti-aging. So the polyphenols that are present in cocoa include quercetrin, which is also found, in your onion and your garlic family. It also contains copper and chromium. Those are also two more important trace minerals for the skin and body health. And then I think I mentioned earlier, it contains anthocyanin and procyanidin. And it also contains phenolic acid as well, and those are your polyphenols. So ingesting cocoa gives you minerals, methylxanthines, and polyphenols. And then on the skin surface, the methylxanthines and the polyphenols are also used as well. So cocoa is used in many of your older moisturizing preparations as an antioxidant. And that antioxidant capability also preserves the lipids that are in the moisturizer. So, for example, if you have like shea butter in there, you could put cocoa in there to stabilize the shea butter. Or there may be other natural oils like sesame seed oil or olive oil or hemp oil. And all those oils need to have an antioxidant so that the lipids don't go rancid in the formulation. And cocoa, in addition to other antioxidants, usually use some vitamin A, they'll use some vitamin C, some vitamin E. Many times these antioxidants are there to allow the formulation to be stable, not necessarily to function as antioxidants on the skin. And then many preparations with cocoa powder and cocoa butter are used in the diaper area in children so that you get protection of the area as well as reduced inflammation. So many of your older diaper preparations are very rich in cocoa, and most of them contain around 6%.
Interesting. Cocoa diapers. I can see it already. I love it.
Yeah, and I was thinking about cocoa wraps. Well, listen, folks, from barrier protection, anti-inflammatory to cellulite, it sounds like cocoa is the hottest ingredient again, 3,000 years later. And really, Zoe, thank you so much. I think, Raja, you would agree, is by far our sweetest episode to date. And we really are grateful not just for the sweetness of the topic, but also for your expertise, really taking us through the nitty-gritty of all that it takes to really study these ingredients in a really reliable manner, as well as the broad knowledge of oral and topical use of cocoa, all the way to some clinical examples. I mean, this was a real tour de force, and we didn't expect anything less. Thank you, Zoe, for your time, for your expertise, and for teaching all of us. Thank you.
Hey, Hadar, you don't get to be the only one with dad jokes. I think my contribution here would be so much darkness with so much enlightenment. Wouldn't you say?
Love it.
Yeah, it's kind of lame, but that's okay. I'll let myself out the door when we finish this up today.
Excellent.
Thank you, Zoe. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. But hey, Raja, every time we dive into these conversations on the podcast, it feels like there's still so much more to uncover.
Exactly, Hadar. That's why I look forward to the IDS every year. It's the best conference. I'm biased, of course, but I love it. It's the perfect place to continue exploring the latest in research, sharing ideas, and learning how to apply integrative strategies into a real-world dermatology practice.
I agree. And you know how every year we like to have a theme? Well, this year's theme couldn't be more relevant. Ready for it? Here it comes. Guide your patients towards a healthy biome and optimal skin health.
Love it.
Yeah, because we know that skin health isn't just about treating the surface. It's about understanding the entire biome and how it connects to overall health.
And that's exactly what we'll be tackling at the 8th Integrative Dermatology Symposium happening from August 22nd through the 24th at the Westin La Paloma Resort and Spa in Tucson, Arizona.
We've got an amazing lineup of expert-led sessions covering key conditions that you see in clinic every day, like eczema, psoriasis, vitiligo, prurigo nodularis, chronic urticaria, and melasma. Plus, we have great insights into how movement, weight loss, and even coca polyphenols can impact skin health.
Well, who doesn't want some good cocoa polyphenols? And what really makes IDS special is the interactive format. We're not all just sitting around through lectures. We're more interactive. We have real-world case discussions, hands-on workshops, and plenty of opportunities to connect with colleagues who are just as passionate about integrative dermatology as we are.
And let's not forget about the location, all right? This is the Westin La Paloma Resort and Spa. This is the perfect place to learn and recharge. So you can explore scenic desert trails, relax by the waterfalls, stargaze under the Arizona sky, play a round of golf or tennis, or just simply unwind at the spa. And of course, we'll have our usual spectacular evening receptions where you can catch up with colleagues and make new connections.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to be stargazing and whispering sweet integrative nothings to each other. Now that sounds like the ideal way to learn, recharge, and connect all in one weekend. So if you haven't already, head over to integrativedermatologysymposium.com to check out all the details and save your spot.
That's integrativedermatologysymposium.com. We can't wait to see you at the IDS 2025 in Tucson, Arizona. Let's take integrative dermatology to the next level and do it together.